Wrecker, you conscious? Get back in the game, man. Stay with me.
Starting a game on a humorous note is always a plus. All right, with that out of the way, let's look at Battlefield 4. The lighting was definitely one of the high points. Here you can see an example of how the developers at DICE did a great job of hiding some of their tricks to accomplish both great lighting without causing lag. So if you look closely here, this plant is not actually casting a shadow on the ground below it. It's a great way to save on processing power for this God ray effect, but it's really hard to tell because the ground underneath it is uneven rubble, so it does a great job of hiding that there's no shadow from the plant, and the average passerby won't even notice. And one thing that's really cool about Battlefield is the ever-changing weather. It's not always a bright and sunny day or a clear night, but rain or shine, it always seems to look beautiful. And if you're a fan of lens flares, you'll love the orange flare that has become somewhat a staple in Battlefield, be seen quite often in Battlefield 4, maybe almost a little too often in some cases. While most games can limit your interactions to only things that you really need to do to progress the game, with Battlefield 4, you can interact with a lot more than that. For example, notice we're in this room here, there's a random light fixture hanging from the ceiling. Not only that, but you can actually run into it, collide with it, and interact with this object. It's just a nice little touch to really help make you believe that the environment is real. Of course, it's not always that way. One of the things that took us out of the believability of the game were the cloth simulations. If you notice here, the cloth curtains are being blown around in the wind, so you'd think that since you were able to interact with the random light fixture, maybe you should be able to interact with the curtains that are seemingly already being influenced by the world around it. But then again, you don't pick up a game like Battlefield 4 to play with curtains. So here we threw a grenade to the upper level where there are some bad guys shooting, and notice that it's not only the bad guys that get blown up, the entire statue and most of everything around it gets blown to bits, leaving the area clear to sneak up and pick off the remaining bad guys. It's a great example of the type of strategy that you can do in Battlefield 4. Something that really stood out to us was the great use of props and assets for set dressing. Notice this backpack and clothes laying on the sidewalk? Technically, it's modeled and textured really well, but it serves absolutely no purpose in the game other than to help build realism. Now, the great use of little details like the set dressing made it really hard for us to overlook something that was probably the biggest technical issue that we had with the game, and that's this specular highlight that seemed to be caked all over the walls throughout the entire environment. So notice in this really dark hallway, there's a single light on the far end. As we make our way down the hall, keep your eye on the walls to the left and the right. Notice that that high specularity on the walls is creating almost a secondary light source that's becoming very powerful and really very distracting. Of course, we did just get out of the water in that particular area, so you could give it the benefit of the doubt, assume that the walls are damp and wet, except that's not the only place that it happens. Notice here that the ground is completely dry, but on the walls, and any even props on the walls, for some reason, there's a really high specular highlight that gives everything a very wet feel in an otherwise dry environment. Now, sometimes technical issues in games can provide comic relief, as you can see in this shot. Keep your eyes on the bodies of the bad guys as you drive away. Those bad guys were formerly alive and shooting at us from the turret. As soon as we killed them and then took their vehicle and drove away, this is what happened. Now, this last glitch happens very fast. You might want to rewind the video or maybe even pause it to see what happens, but notice as we jump off the building, all of a sudden, most of the buildings just disappear. Thankfully, most of the issues that we found with Battlefield 4 really didn't detract from how fun it was to put together strategies with your squad mates and kill the bad guys. Now, if you haven't already, be sure to add us on Xbox Live or PlayStation Network using the gamertag Digital-Tutors, and we'll see you online.